and we'll take it from there. So as most of you probably know, yesterday the SEC proved that it meant what it said by delivering a large number of subpoenas to a number of different participants in the crypto industry. It's very difficult, of course, to know precisely what all those subpoenas were after, but many of them were certainly going to relate to the fact that people had sold tokens without complying with various parts of the federal securities laws. They had sold to unaccredited investors, they hadn't sold to Reg D, they hadn't given appropriate disclosure information, they had permitted significant retrading or hadn't limited resales and retrading and so on. And so we anticipate, of course, continuing that as a result of those subpoenas, that there will probably be some significant SEC enforcement actions coming down the pipe. For those people who have been told that you have a utility token and that a utility token is something other than a securities token, that is not a thing. It is just not a thing. The fact that a token may have some utility at the outset does not mean that it is not a security. The SEC chairman has said on a number of occasions, and there is actually a great deal of justice to this position, that the SEC has yet to see a token that is not a security. If you have a token, and if it does not look massively different in really, really important regulatory respects from every other token that is out there, ask yourself, why is this the one token that the SEC isn't going to view as a security? There are lots of other regulations, and we'll talk about a number of the other regulations, both on the cryptocurrency side as well as on the business side, for how the particular token is going to be used. I'm just going to say one more thing, just as a precursor to this conversation, which is, from our vantage point, from Wilson Sonsini's vantage point, doing the pre-sale, doing that private placement to accredited investors in the U.S. is easy. It's always been easy. U.S. securities lawyers have known how to do private placements in the United States at least since the Securities Act of 1933 was passed. We know how to do private placements. We're good at doing private placements. The really hard part for most platforms and most other issuers should not be the private placement, should not be that how do you get from that pre-sale to tokens that can be freely traded by the people who hold them? How can retail investors get them? How can we have a platform that can actually use those tokens in the way that's intended? We can talk some more about those. Truthfully, the answers come down right now in the U.S. to three ways. One is to register the tokens. Two is to register them on the Reg A Plus offering. Third is, in some cases, to wait for a year and a day and rely on Rule 144, which will essentially permit those tokens to become freely tradable. But there are a lot of limits to that, and so it won't work for many platforms to rely solely on that 1 year and a day period. Okay, that's my preamble. With that, let me ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they're doing and what they're interested in. And as I said, we'll move forward from there. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer. I'm with Canvas Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm that invests in fintech and marketplaces and enterprise. And we're super interested in the tools that help regulate crypto assets in the future. And before Canvas, I turned an old tank museum into a hacker house. We had 8 founders working on everything from underwater robots to self-driving cars to social enterprises on the blockchain. And yeah, that's me.
Well, so Jennifer, when we were talking earlier, you raised a really good question, I thought. I think all of us did, about how do you convince people in your line? How are you convincing people that cryptocurrency is actually going to be a thing? Right? How do you convince your colleagues? How do you convince consumers? How do you convince people that this is something with staying power and not just?
So you have to look. So one, it was a lot harder this time last year. But what you have to convince people of is, one, all the different tokens are used for different things. Like sometimes it's a store of value, sometimes it's going to help run a marketplace. But you have to convince them that people care, and I think the last 4 months have shown that people care. But we'll see in the next year or two. If you have any suggestions to that, I'd love your feedback.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Nelson. I'm the CEO and founder of Hackers and Founders. We're one of the largest groups of nerds building startups in the world. Through that, I was asked to become an advisor to the SEC on capital formation, so I've been in DC a couple of times a year, underneath the eye of Sauron, who sees all, who knows all. And it was actually that experience that led me to believe that one of the biggest problems in investing in startups worldwide is liquidity, and a fundamental lack of secondary liquidity, which led me to take on the quixotic quest of tokenizing a venture capital fund. And we are obviously a security. We are essentially a publicly traded closed-end fund. We are selling it to a handful of investors, very rich investors in the United States. We are doing a lot of anti-money laundering and KYC compliance, and we are keeping everything else offshore and out of the United States.
John, what is the advantage of tokenizing a venture fund as opposed to just having a book entry for your LLC interest or your LP interest? Why is the tokenization?
So venture capital as it stands now, the job is to essentially pick a company that I'm going to buy a piece of, and then I'm going to wait to see and hope to God that this company gets flipped to Google for $500 million or they can IPO. Until then, that money is frozen inside of this startup. If you have a liquid fund, my investors can buy, sell, and trade shares. They can trade stock in my fund. So my job as a fund manager becomes, I need to grow the value of my fund, i.e., I need to invest in startups that I can measurably and provably and auditably say they are growing in value. And so all of a sudden, I don't care where you are in the world. I don't necessarily care about your exit option. I don't care about your IPO. I just need, like Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway, to say, is this company going to grow in value over the long term, and is it going to grow quickly? And I think it fundamentally changes the economics of venture capital, and eventually I think it moves economies.
So I'm going to ask you one more question which you do not have to answer.
Yes.
Okay. In the venture fund space or the whole private fund space in the U.S.,
Yes.
one of the reasons that we haven't had significant retrading or secondary trading is because of the PTP rules, publicly traded partnership rules, right? So, in a general matter, we can avoid the publicly traded part. Essentially, if we do too much trading, the partnership gets taxed as a corporation, we destroy the economics for people.
Yep.
So, are you relying on? Are you only allowing big trades that exceed 10%? Or how are you dealing with the PTP rules?
So we're essentially not. This is a legal entity offshore, and we are complying with the legal regulations of the offshore. Okay. And so it's rich people buying an offshore fund, and that is what it is.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mario Costanza. I'm from New York. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Happy Tax, and we have a division called Crypto Tax Prep. I've had a long career in entrepreneurship, everything from restaurants to internet companies, and our company is currently the fastest growing tax company ranked by Entrepreneur Magazine. The Crypto Tax Prep division is our fastest growing division within that fastest growing company.
So, Mario, do you want to talk to us a little bit about taxation of crypto assets? Tell us things that are going to make people fall off their seats.
Sure. So first of all, any crypto to crypto transaction, any crypto to fiat transaction, any crypto transaction used to purchase goods or services are all capital gains or losses for purposes of IRS taxation. The IRS in 2014 deemed crypto as property, not currency. So many people have unfortunately not complied with the laws and the rules of this country up until now. And in fact, in 2015, only 800 people filed to pay taxes on their crypto gains. Coinbase was sued subsequently after that, and actually next week they're turning over the data of over 13,000 people that did not claim, and they're going to be getting some nasty letters from the IRS with plenty of taxes due and penalties and interest. So ultimately, being compliance up front is going to be helpful in anyone that is trading any type of crypto. So it's unfortunately many people aren't, but we're actually extremely busy helping the mainstream people that have now come into this space, as well as the old school people that have kind of realized, oh, I got to get my stuff together now. So we're happy to be helping those people.
What about up until Trump changed the law where it's property for property, then they added like property? Because when you trade property, you don't have to declare capital tax. It's like for like, so to speak. And Bitcoin fell into that until it was changed in 2018. So
it actually wasn't changed. That's one of the biggest misconceptions that is out there. Unfortunately, two major publications, Bloomberg and Forbes, wrote articles that had clickbait headlines that talked just about that. And the law, all it did was change the requirements for a 1031 exchange to only apply to real estate. The law also did not change anything in 2017 or backwards. In order to qualify for a 1031 like-kind exchange, a couple things have to happen. You have to report those transactions in your tax return, first of all, which means that you are putting yourself on the radar. Next up, if you look at the way it is viewed from government authorities, it's looked at more like a security. And securities, if you trade Microsoft or Facebook stock, you cannot do a 1031 exchange. Same thing applies to trading gold for silver. You can't do a 1031 exchange for that. So for those reasons, as well as the fact that the IRS has been asked for guidance on this and they haven't provided it, we feel very strongly that 1031 exchanges are not allowable for crypto pre or post 2018.
For what it's worth, we agree with that entirely. Sergio, I'm going to ask you in just a second. Jennifer, I'm going to warn you that I'm going to come back to you just right after Sergio, because it's going to lead to a question I'm going to want to ask you too.
Hi again. My name is Sergey Shundrov and I'm the CEO of Mom Life, and we're building a digital economy for the single largest economic power online among all demographics. We're working with Rob and team on figuring out how to transition into a world where people participating in a network and contributing to it in the form of content or engagement with third parties who are commercially active on the network can become economic stakeholders in it. And as far as the first part of the process, which is launching the economy, I have been heartbroken by Rob and team several times in this process, and I hope we're gonna have some good news soon.
Yeah,
I also,
yeah,
just to finish, I also come from 15 years of investment banking experience, and specifically capital markets, and thinking about the regulatory issues related to fundraising in a traditional markets context. So everything that goes on now in the new paradigm is extremely fascinating and a huge learning experience.
Sergio, how have I broken your heart the most?
Well, I think you know.
Well, let's
I
put
think-
that one aside and talk about the regulatory issue.
What we're ultimately getting at is an environment in which moms, which are a huge economic power collectively, but financially challenged individually in most markets that we concentrate on, are able to get rewarded for the work that they do and the time they spend in networks, and not only as income, but also as an opportunity to grow wealth and invest de facto, which they haven't done ever before, because the token they are rewarded with is the foundation of, is something that crystallizes the GDP of that network and the specific economic activity that moms conduct. And if it's a security and we cannot create a liquid market for it immediately, then obviously we're not where we want to be. The token that people are rewarded with needs to be freely exchangeable into fiat or other crypto.
Jennifer, so in most crypto offerings, most well-advised crypto offerings, even if it's not absolutely required, we're going to do AML and KYC. You know, I know you're going to want to talk some about this as well. Talk to us a little bit, if you will, or kind of about how you're thinking about AML, KYC, OFAC, and similar types of reviews, not necessarily in the initial offering with respect to exchange trading or other transfers of tokens.
Thank you. So initially I got interested in AMY and KYC and AML purposely for Bitcoin. And so I was tracking, how do you track something that was supposed to be anonymous, and then we started looking into companies like Chainalysis and Elliptic that actually had to deploy a bunch of extra wallets on the network to help figure out, and I know this is not the question you exactly asked me, but to figure out where nefarious bad actors were on the network because no one had been tracking it to that point. And so that's for older token networks. It's like there's a bunch of data out there. They don't know who it is, who it's not. Going forward, I assume that everyone's going to do AML, KYC, so that you don't have to go retroactively backwards and figure out who owns the wallets. But yeah, that's.
So you want
to? Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm Sunny Singh. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of BitPay. BitPay is the largest processor of Bitcoin in the world. So we'll process close to $4 billion this year in Bitcoin payments. So roughly every 5 to 10 seconds, a Bitcoin transaction is done on one of our merchants' websites. So it's actually showing that Bitcoin is being used around the world other than just for trading and stock speculation, so to speak. We've raised over $60 million in venture funding, investors like Index Ventures, Founders Fund. And yes, it is tough convincing Silicon Valley VCs about Bitcoin because they don't really have a Bitcoin blockchain expert on staff. And then if they have one, he's got to convince all the other partners about what Bitcoin is and how this is not a fad. And most of the time, they end up not investing in these companies. So Coinbase is the last round, IVP is the late stage fund that did the deal, but all of the early, top VCs all passed on it actually. And that's happening across the board because there's not enough data points to say, hey, you're doing great because the market's going up in the last year, so everyone's doing great. What about a downturn? We want to see a downturn and see how you do, actually. So a lot of the top VCs have actually been sitting out this last year of rally, I'd say, in the Bitcoin industry.
Sonny, you're not actually doing ICOs or offering your own currency. You're trading. You're helping other people trade, in this case, Bitcoin. Tell us about the kind of regulatory environment you face both in the U.S. and outside.
Yeah. So first of all, since you're legal, we don't help people trade Bitcoin.
You're right.
We help people spend Bitcoin.
Fair enough.
And we actually don't help people. We help merchants. So think of us like First Data. You don't realize you use First Data when you swipe a credit card. That's who BitPay is essentially. So we never interact with the consumer. We allow companies like Microsoft to accept Bitcoin. And so we KYC and AML on Microsoft. So we make sure Microsoft's not selling drugs or doing anything illegal and all that. And we have our chief compliance officer originally came from Visa. He built their AML policy. So we spend a lot of time on AML. Arthur Levitt, the former chairman of the SEC, is on our board of directors. Jim Robinson, former chairman of American Express, is on our board. So we don't do any high risk stuff. So everyone asks about, are you going to set marijuana pretty soon with marijuana dealers? No, we don't actually. We don't do high risk because if we could, we can totally get marijuana vendors up and running quickly. But then we lose all our banking partnerships. The government's already focused on us as it is. So we work very closely with the government, the Secret Service, the NSA, all of them. We follow suspicious activity reports, SARS, about one a week right now. And so whenever the government comes over saying, hey, show us this transaction that Microsoft did, we're like, here you go, here's all the documents, here's what we have on them, here's the driver's license they submitted when they opened the account, bank statements, whatever else you guys want. So again, Bitcoin's not the best thing to do illegal transactions with because it's really not anonymous, and everything is stored permanently.
My name is Anita Mitwani. I work for Celsius Network. We are a peer-to-peer decentralized lending and borrowing platform. We are, I don't know if I can still say we're the only wallet where you can earn interest on your coin, but you can earn interest on your assets. You can also borrow dollars against your crypto assets on our platform. We are hoping for regulation, praying for regulation, partially to kind of clear out the, I don't know, for lack of a better word, shit in the system where, ICOs are getting a bad name. We don't even call our project an ICO. We're calling it a token generation event. People are contributors. It's a project. Yeah, I think that's about.
So Anita, the OCC, the Office of Control of the Currency, has proposed a regulation. It hasn't adopted it, but it's proposed a regulation that would allow lending companies, for example, not to have to go state by state, but instead to get a national charter, a national thrift charter. It has been, as I said, it's not been adopted. The notion has been that therefore you don't have to go, you don't have to deal with 50 state regulators, you get to one. The reaction of the industry has been fairly fierce against the OCC on the theory that the OCC is not the most nimble of regulators and an early stage company that is still has lots of evolution to do, would have to keep going back to the FCC. But as you think about regulation, right, as you think about state versus federal regulation, how do the regulators interact with you? How do you think about developing good relationships and helping regulators understand your business and come up with an appropriate way, a framework for regulating you?
Well, one thing I forgot to mention, which is what I meant to say, is we are partnered with one of the largest, if not the largest, financial institution on earth, and they are acting as our custodian, and so they are very integral in that process. So that state-by-state thing that we talked about, that they're partnering with us to take care of that.
Hi, I'm Vlad Trifans. I'm Chief Product Officer at Ambrosus. We are a Swiss startup, and we combine blockchain and Internet of Things technologies to do supply chain management. So we focus specifically on food, pharma, and commodity shipments. And we use this combination, this cocktail of technologies to first have end-to-end product traceability. You want to know where it started, where it's been through, how it was conserved, how it was transported. Then obviously anti-counterfeiting. You want to detect when someone is like swapping the good stuff for the bad stuff. And then the best part is like you can then much more, you basically you have built-in compliance and regulation because you take a very proactive approach of logging all that information. So when you have an audit coming in, then you have all that data that's kind of transparent, then you can produce without doing an, oh my God, we have to collect all that data from all those different servers. You take a different approach by integrating all that data in the process, and that's what we do.
If you're, given probably the breadth of the supply chain, you almost can't help but working in virtually every region of the world.
Yeah.
Right? How do you think about international regulation? How do you keep on top of, even just in the US, we have to keep on top of the US regulation, each state's regulation across a whole range of different subject matters. You have that multiplied by, I forget, 193 or something like that. But how do you guys think about cross-border regulation?
Sure, so I think there are two levels of regulation. One is the more general financial aspect of it, which directly relates to startups and currency. The other regulation which we're even more interested in is like when a company is importing fish in the US, right? So when you're buying all that fish, you have lots of FDA's checks in place. You have to check that the fish was transported. So I think this is where crypto becomes very, very interesting, especially in the notion of smart contracts, because you can kind of model two different regulations usually and try to find the matching points into those things. So you can say, well, if this check passes in China, then automatically it corresponds to those two checks we have on our checklist in the US. And I think this is one of the most interesting opportunities actually, because you can digitalize all those very thick paper-based, not the entire thing, but at least some very measurable, very quantifiable elements of those contracts.
Scott, you want to tell us about you?
Hi, my name is Scott Armanini. I am an angel investor. I've brought emerging technologies to market for the past 30 years here in Silicon Valley. My interests are in the commercialization of blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and as it relates to the large-scale adoption within large enterprises.
Scott, talk to us a little bit about how you think about some of the regulatory challenges and regulatory issues. I think, for example, we were talking earlier about, for example, something like a sales tax on coins and how that works into, or how do you think about that in terms of your development and harmonization activities?
Very well. I mean, just ask by show of hands, how many of us have reported sales tax on internet transactions? Any of us? No. So, I mean, it's kind of a nuisance thing, right? I mean, we all know that it's there and we should probably be reporting it, but we don't. So to the extent to which we are not reporting or even considering, giving consideration to reporting other types of transactions, such as cryptocurrency or asset exchanges, I mean, it just goes to the nature of human behavior. And we have to be mindful of this, that these types of assets need to be reported and reconciled, and there are going to be considerable taxes and penalties that are due for lack of compliance here. And for my particular interest, again, the adoption of technologies within enterprises large on a global basis, regulation is essential because it brings harmony and stability to the marketplace. And once you have harmony and stability, then you have the opportunity to not only attract additional talent, but also additional capital, and that's where the innovation really comes from.
So I want to open it up now to questions, because this is probably a uniquely good panel to start with that.
Sure. I guess I'll start. Given the indictment and resignation of the president this afternoon, all awake?
Fake news.
Yeah, fake news. So,
That's right.
I love you, John. So the
live stream.
yes, in the ICO market right now, there are obvious. So reading the boards and just the discussion right now on Bitcoin Talk and all of these are making the assumption, whether or not that it's true, that the recent subpoenas have been going after really the top of the line of bad actors in the system who have really just been doing really sketchy things outside what most of the other ICOs are doing. But a whole lot of the rest of the market of ICOs are basically operating under it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission, and saying, you know what, we're just not going to pay attention to a lot of this off the bat. And then once it becomes an issue, either we'll have enough money to pay the issue away, or we'll just, be dead and it won't be an issue anyway. How would you convince an ICO to do it, quote unquote, the right way instead of operating under forgiveness rather than permission?
How many fines have been paid by Swiss banks doing business in the U.S.? I mean, think about that. It's billions and billions of dollars that have been paid by Swiss banks for noncompliance with U.S. law. That type of capital doesn't exist to be freely spent on fines in the ICO industry, so to speak, right? So you can either do things the correct way and have a chance for longevity, or you can do things your way, and not your way personally, but the way that somebody might presume to do so by themselves without any thought towards compliance, and be out of business. So if you're in it for the long haul, you have to play by the rules, whatever those rules might be.
And here's an analogous, so Canvas Ventures, the partners were previously investors in Lending Club, and if you're familiar with peer-to-peer lending, it's sort of like peer-to-peer payments and so actually Lending Club closed down to get their regulation. They actually were second to the market. Prosper was first, but Prosper was like, screw you guys, we don't need you. And then that's a tale as old of time. If you want to build something that lasts for a while, then you have to work with the regulators to make sure it gets regulated.
Yeah, so I've actually been advisor of several ICOs, including Civic and Unicorn, that raise a lot of money. And they've all used top law firms, and the ones I'm working with right now are all paying Roberts $300K, which I think that's going right now for the ICO docs right now, and they're being told, all the ones I'm seeing now in Silicon Valley that are raising a lot are all doing security tokens now. And they just feel like that's the way now they have to go, regardless if they're classified as utility or not, they're all going security way now.
So you think the crackdown eventually is going to hit everybody but the ones who started?
Everyone's getting ready for the crackdown.
We were given the document by a reputable law firm that said we are a utility token, and as Rob said, just go tear that up. However, we've been acting as a regulated security. I mean, we only take accredited investors. We don't pay
or go offshore.
Yeah.
I'm not going to try not to butt in too much, but as an overview, when you are dealing with federal financial regulators in the U.S., you don't get forgiveness. That is the thing. You get shut down. Your business goes away. The penalties often with bankruptcy, and your ability to continue to operate is going to be legally curtailed.
And prison.
And well, in fraud cases, that may be right.
TLDR, don't sell to U.S. unaccredited investors.
Yes.
So to follow through on this, with the case that everybody's getting ready for the big crackdown on, which basically every utility is a security impact. Do you think that we're really going to see a change in the way ICOs are distributed where I'm seeing that a lot of the ways people are thinking now is that actually you let the accredited investors invest in the equity part of the company, and then the token distribution happens with no price attached to it, where basically the token gets distributed for free at a certain, by certain metric. For example, if I'm a big whale with a big Ether wallet, I'm going to get a lot of, or proportionate amount to what I invested in equity. Meaning, the reasoning here is that, well, like, an ICO project cannot be sued by giving away something that is actually free, and so it cannot be a security.
Yeah, but one problem with the whole ICO industry is the big bottleneck is getting the liquidity eventually. So the SEC just shuts down Bittrex and a couple others, and then you're stuck. So they don't shut down the individual ICO, they shut down the exchanges where the utility tokens are being traded. Then you got to go to some shady exchange off the mainland or whatever. You might not get listed. There's the bigger problem. I see, and I don't know the other stuff you talk about. I'm not sure. I always see the bottleneck right now is getting listed on a Bittrex right now, and they're getting harder and harder as we know, right?
Well, that is true, of course, but that's not an issue of compliance. My question is, everybody is fearing that the sales of tokens that are priced, by the team. And then
maybe I can take this one.
Yeah.
Real quickly, if the tokens are securities, and almost all tokens are securities, giving away the tokens is in fact a distribution that needs to be done either through a valid private placement or through a registered offering. Last year, for example, T-Mobile and several other Wi-Fi wireless companies did register common stock specifically so they could do stock giveaways. So giving away the tokens, airdropping the tokens and the like doesn't solve your problem. You can't do it, and B, even if you do, those tokens are still restricted, you still can't trade them. So you may be able to give them away to accredited investors, but you haven't solved your liquidity problems.
Yeah, what I also would add to answers to this question is that getting investors into equity does not allow to fully align interests under the new paradigm where the economic value is within the token. And again, using our example, we're building a network which uses a token to crystallize value of all economic activity on the network and make everyone an economic stakeholder. And giving equity with rights actually distances people from economic value unless there is an equal sign between equity and tokens, which is not a given.
Yes.
How do you think about the framework that was in the Wyoming law and process that passed the House and not the Senate? Is that a roadmap from the SEC? Do you think that they actually talk?
I thought it was we're talking about
Yeah.
that being Wyoming would maybe not be the best safe haven or a place that people are going to go to set up shop. I know hedge funds set up shop over there.
Absolutely.
But the structure that they articulated, do you think that was informed by the SEC, or do you think they just made that up?
No, I don't think the SEC will tell states what to do. There's a close collaboration between NASA, the group that represents state securities administrators, and the SEC. The SEC typically wouldn't work that way with the company. Again, I have nothing against the Wyoming legislation. The problem with the Wyoming legislation is it applies only in Wyoming, and so it doesn't really help you when you're raising money outside of Wyoming. It doesn't tell you anything about the New York license statute, for example. Who's next? Yes.
You mentioned about the fact that go for accredited investors, right? That way you're safe from a regulation point of view. But if you're a genuine ICO, then you're genuine. Then someone can't come after you, right? And if you're not genuine, then even if you go for accredited investors, if it's a fraud case, then still regulators can come after you. So how does that really make a difference?
So if you are a genuine, let's just get rid of the term ICO, and this is a security sale. So you are crowdfunding a security sale, and there is a lot of established laws around how you actually crowdfund a security. You can sell to rich people in the United States. If you're going to sell to unaccredited investors in the United States, you have to go through a registered portal, you have to go through either title crowdfunding, you have to go through Reg A or Reg A+. That's it. Or you register for a public IPO. So if you want to sell to unaccredited investors in the United States, you need to actually say, I'm going to do it this way, or this way. And so if you're going to do kind of the authentic ICO and say, you know, dude, I'm going to keep treating, you know, it's distributed, it's everybody. Okay, I can be distributed and everybody and be in jail in the United States, or I can not sell to unaccredited investors in the United States.
More questions? Yes.
How do you integrate sales to accredited in the United States under Reg D and sales to non-US people outside the United States under Reg S? How do you guys handle that?
How do we handle it?
Well, how does one handle that?
How does one handle that? I would probably throw it to the securities lawyer. I am not a securities lawyer, but I slept in an American Express, Holiday Inn Express last night.
I like that.
But I did sleep in a Holiday Inn Express last night. So basically, all of our legal entity, our banking, all of that is offshore. And so selling to accredited investors in the United States is, hey, this is an unregistered fund offshore, and you're going to have little to no legal recourse. At the same time, if I screw you over, I'm screwing you over, and the world is going to know that. So I take that seriously. And to unaccredited investors in the rest of the world, it's essentially an online shopping cart, and we're being very, very careful to actually comply with KYC and AML rules, just because, you know, we're dealing a lot with Latin America, and their big thing is like, you know, no narcos, no money laundering. I was just in the Middle East, and they're like, no money laundering. And so we're being extremely anal about that, and that actually doing the AML and KYC checks actually gives us a pretty good way to just keep unaccredited US investors out.
Vlad, sorry, do you two want to talk a little bit about international regulation?
Actually, I have a question for you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
So in terms of the subpoenas that were filed on the ICO, is there a way to get that list of which ones they subpoenaed?
No.
Oh, that's not public, right? I'm curious.
You give it somewhere between 6 and 12 months, and you'll have a pretty good idea of what a number of them are. Yeah.
And then the next question to you again, I mean, obviously that SEC moves very slowly, so there's a timing window. You can still get your ICO out and still go for a year, 6 months, who knows? What's your time frame on this whole thing, like when the real crackdown begins, so to speak?
Well, I guess I'm going to answer that question a little bit differently. I think the real crackdown has begun, right? And I think you're at the very early stages of the real crackdown. I think the real crackdown has a number of different parts to it. But I think the first crackdown is probably the SEC, and to some extent, other federal regulators, potentially the CFTC, potentially FinCEN, various state regulators coming in. I think that process will continue to unfold, and as you point out, and rightly so, don't take the position that this is it, then the SEC can't look back. The SEC has at least a 5-year statute of limitations. It has a long time, right? And even then, the SEC can enter into tolling agreements with respondents, with the potential defendants, in which it says essentially, would you like us to sue you now, or would you like give us a little bit more time to investigate and maybe think about it? And you tend to enter into tolling agreements with the SEC at that point. But after the SEC comes in, historically, in securities litigation, again, this is securities litigation, then the private plaintiffs come in, and then there's the private litigation. And so, again, to your point, right, I think that this is a first or an early shoot to try. I think that to the extent that we see that these subpoenas were going after low-hanging fruit, you shouldn't assume that that's all the fruit the SEC is going after, right? Like any good prosecutor, they will go after the easy stuff first, and they will build from there. They'll build their record, and they'll keep going. So one of the things we absolutely advise companies that have done previous token sales that may have gone to non-accredited investors or that otherwise were not done properly is let's fix it. Don't sit out there and hope that because the SEC hasn't found you yet, that they're not going to find you. Because even if they don't, private investors will. Somebody will find you if something doesn't go just the right way. There's a tremendous amount of risk there. So better to find it and fix it than to let somebody else force you into fixing it.
So actually, another question again, sorry. So on the ICOs of last year, right, when they were Wild West and utility tokens were launching, and they did the private sale where they raised $30 million, and that was a lot that was from accredited. And then they did the public sale, and they launched on the, they launched it. And the public sale is not for accredited. Did that have to be for accredited too then?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's.
Absolutely, yeah.
So then they
Absolutely.
all fell in fault of that last year then?
Right.
Okay.
Right. I'm sorry, certainly.
So, I wanted to raise this. So we're really talking about a lot of legal axioms right now, and make no mistake about it. The U.S. is very difficult, not just in the sense that it's a pioneer of lots of regulatory scrutiny, but in that it's a leader and a standard for other jurisdictions. And if we cannot conduct a public sale within a given project in the US, then it's very likely that in most other places in the world are also not going to be different. I think though, given that it's pretty obvious to everyone right now, is it an interesting topic to hypothesize, what should be? Because we all understand legal aspects aside what a utility token is. There is a type where they're used in vending machines, for pure utility, and without people relying on a common enterprise and hoping to make a profit. There are some where people essentially invest in themselves and their ability to build an entrepreneurial business and to build value that they are direct economic stakeholders in. And there should be a point where a legal system is aligned with a new reality, and the reality is new, which explains why it's completely not in sync with kind of the legal environment.
Let me follow up on that. Mario, let me ask you a question. Company that's done a token offering, let's say they've done it correctly under the federal securities laws. They've sold a SAFT, get over here so people can hear me. They've sold a SAFT. They've taken the position that they're going to defer the income over a number of years. Do you guys agree with that multi-year deferral?
Well, generally that's the way it will. If it's security, you're not going to show it as revenue. You're going to show it as equity. So if you're doing a utility for the ones that have put their structure to attempt to be a utility, in that case you would show it as deferred revenue on your balance sheet.
And how long will you defer?
It should be deferred for the amount of time until it actually should be usable. So whenever that inventory becomes used by your product being out there in the wild and being used by people or consumers or customers, at that point in time is when you would start to recognize it, which also becomes a challenge in what these structures really are all about, is that most of them won't be used. Most of them are really being put out there just as ways to raise capital.
So you won't be taxed the first year for utility token on the money you raised?
It'll be deferred until it's used. You'll put it to cash and you'll put it as a deferred revenue as a liability on your balance sheet.
You take a different position.
That's what I heard.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
You use the term "find it and fix it." It seems if you've sold a security in violation of U.S. law, that's not really fixable. You can mitigate it. What do you mean by fix it? Try to unwind the deal, pay them the money back, make it go away?
Yeah, I didn't mean, I'm sorry guys, I didn't mean to be a panelist here, I apologize.
No, that was great.
It's good stuff.
Again, we have to remember that tokens to the SEC and tokens to state regulators are just securities. And historically, both at the federal level and at the state level, if you do an illegal sale of securities, one of the ways you fix it is to do a rescission offer. You buy them back, right? Whether you buy them all back, whether you buy back just the ones you sold to people who weren't qualified, depends on the facts, but you buy back securities. In a blockchain context, that can be very difficult because the people who bought them may not still hold them. And you may not actually know, you may not actually be able to trace through now who holds them. At that point, we talk about whether we're going to do forks, whether we're going to start to turn off the tokens and start all over again. But if there have been significant sales, we really to non-accredited investors, actually if we have sales to non-accredited investors, we otherwise haven't followed federal securities laws. We need to follow the roadmap that we have for almost 80 years of securities laws, which is we've got to undo those transactions. I know, you know, this is the effect I have on the room all the time, which is why we have the panel. Yes.
I just think it would be naive for people to think that there's a way to get rich quick. There isn't. There are no shortcuts in life. You work hard, you create something of value that other people recognize as valuable, and you reap the rewards from that. And the way that people have gone about raising money through these ICOs, selling something of little value or no value, and trying to trick people into thinking that this isn't something that's a problem, is just wrong. And it's unfortunate that so many people have been caught up in the mania, the hysteria of trying to get coins and tokens, which are not liquid, and in many instances are not legal.
I think for me a key point of a lot of this is if you actually look at like the top 50 cryptocurrencies that are actually listed on CoinMarketCap, and if you actually look at the number of those that are actually based or have their legal jurisdiction in the United States, it's only about 10 to 20% of them. The vast majority of the ICOs, if you actually go to ICO events, the people who are pitching are not US people. They're Eastern Europeans. There are people from China. There's a handful of people from Latin America. This is really a global phenomenon. And one of the concerns that I have about the media when it actually talks about this is that they tend to kind of assume that everybody who's buying things is in the United States. Everybody who's investing in ICOs is in the United States. Where fact of the matter is I'm actually, spending a lot of time in the Middle East and spending a lot of time talking to Chinese investors. And if I, step on a Chinese regulator's toes, okay. I'm taking a certain amount of regulatory risk in my token sale. At the same time, I'm being very smart about where I'm actually accepting that regulatory risk. And I think that the future of these technologies is not really in the United States because we have such an amazing infrastructure, financial infrastructure, where these things, where tokens are essentially really, really, really useful is in continents where people have, 15% of the people have bank accounts or credit cards. That in my mind is the future of crypto. And that's where I'm thinking about spending a lot of my time in the next decade in this industry.
Let me ask the panelists to maybe take 20 or 30 seconds each and talk about the things we didn't cover or the things that are the most important takeaways for you from this discussion. And Scott, because you're closest to me, I'm going to put you on the spot. Let you go first.
Technology always changes. This is just another technology trend. There will be something that eclipses it 5 years from now. We shouldn't be caught up in the fact that it's blockchain technology versus internet technology versus fast dial tone technology and I'm going back in time, right? There's going to be something faster and better in 5 years. The question is, what value are we creating, and is that value endurable?
Yeah, I guess from my question is, it's a question that I find it very interesting. So if you look 5-10 years forward, and there will be thousands of very, very useful purely utility tokens, how should you actually tax those transactions when you're buying and selling? Does that apply, especially if they're utility tokens? It's like I'm trading and buying all sorts of assets. What's the right way to do that? If you want to enable a true, really universal and fluid marketplace, what's the right way to tax?
I just wonder if anyone has anything to say about what happened in South Korea last week with, I don't know if everyone knows, many people there own cryptocurrency, and the government was going to enforce some strict rules, and the person behind that died, and they have now taken back stringent rules. And it's looking kind of, it does make me feel good about this industry. So I just wanted
It's a very interesting industry, that's for sure. So just
That's an age-old story, though, right? That goes back thousands of years.
Self-regulating.
When money is at stake, things happen.
Things move.
In fintech, any company in fintech, any fintech startup, whether it be a Bitcoin company, a lending company, a payments company, everything takes time. Nothing moves fast in fintech. I've been involved in several fintech startups before. It takes a lot of time. There's regulations. You need to partner with banks. Banks don't move very fast, so it's hard to raise money. Everything goes way above and beyond what you think in timeline, so be prepared for that.
I think the regulatory and legislative environment will change. It will become stricter now, but as consumer proliferation of cryptocurrencies progresses, it will have to adopt to the new reality, because right now I think it's frankly inadequate for the biggest opportunities related to this technology.
I would say that the regulators are going to catch up. So right now there may be some ICOs that kind of slip through, and the IRS has all these people that haven't filed taxes, but all this stuff is on the chain, and all this stuff is going to come to fruition, and people are going to end up in a lot of pain if they don't get into compliance up front. So one other thing that I'll just mention is that you mentioned FinCEN, and the strong probability that anyone holding over $10,000 on any foreign exchange should be filing a FinCEN 114 form to report those assets to the government, or you could face $10,000 to $120,000 fines. So just be aware of that if you have crypto and foreign exchanges as well.
I think that we need to actually start talking with the regulators instead of talking amongst ourselves, and I think we need to actually start a trade organization.
I like the trade organization idea. I think the one takeaway is you can't escape regulators. We've seen it before with peer-to-peer lending. We're seeing it now with peer-to-peer currencies.
Okay, I think we have one last question. Yeah, fine.
Hey, so just regarding the trade organization, I suggest everyone who's interested join the Blockchain Alliance. It was founded out of DC. It's STEPTO, it's former DHS people, but it brings together law enforcement, regulators, exchanges, and enforcement companies. So it's free, Blockchain Alliance, take a look. My question to the panel is, what do you guys think about currency swap systems like Shapeshift and Changely that have no KYC, really no AML? Many of them are funded by US VCs. Like, what happens there when we've created a world where you can flip currencies between anything with no KYC at all? Ideas, thoughts? Global implications?
Shapeshift's not allowed to use it in New York, actually, because they didn't want to apply for the bit license. So you can't use Shapeshift in New York, Washington, or North Carolina.
Will anyone prosecute it? If I call anyone, what are they going to do?
Yeah.
Like,
Well, what if you use a VPN and you're in New York?
Of course, right.
but anybody thoughts on this sort of dramatic change?
I think that there's actually a lot of parallels between like what happened in the file sharing industry and what's actually happening in the crypto industry right now. There are a number of countries that have really clamped down on intellectual property laws and file sharing, namely the United States. And there are a lot of countries who are like, yeah, whatever, dude. Just because it's in their best interest to actually be able to share intellectual property, and they actually take a very kind of open sourcey approach to it. So I think that there's going to be a lot of regulatory arbitrage and regulatory competition between actual countries. I think that there's actually a number of legal jurisdictions who have a very, if you look at Eastern Europe and the number of ICOs that are actually coming out of Eastern Europe, I mean, how much venture funding went into Eastern Europe versus how much ICO money has actually gone into Eastern Europe, which has an amazing base of technological engineers. But they've been capital starved for generations. And so now there's actually going to be a really pretty cool startup crypto ecosystem, Slovenia being a hub, Estonia being another hub. But now they can actually get capital and they can build these industries around this. This is kind of the beginning of a next step in the globalization of startup finance.
I would generalize and paraphrase your question as what's more important, personal freedoms or crime? And to me, this is or preventing crime, and this is to me, an issue that is absolutely tantamount to, well, maybe not absolutely, but to a large extent tantamount to gun control. Right? It's a philosophical debate that probably does not have a solution within the time frame that we have within this audience.
Well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because cryptocurrencies are not just about software and money. They're about political and philosophical ideas being encoded in software.
I would say, I can tell you what they are to me. I think cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin is the most obvious example, are a consumer product. They are democratized money, and they are what gains social scalability for financial incentives that rewards some sort of an activity that creates value. Therefore, maybe to a small cohort of people who have started the movement and who are early blockchain enthusiasts, it's a pivotal philosophical issue, but the adoption will be driven by people who just have everyday use, and that's why I believe the legal system will have to adjust, because the consumer demand is just stronger than the equilibrium.
Maybe if I just want to add something, I think what's really interesting is that the opportunity, you said it's about political and other aspects, but it's also about reinventing the way you do business in the sense of how you price your product. Maybe you give a product for free, and what we're doing is essentially done. We after doing a token sale and raising a certain amount of cryptocurrency, we're in a place where you can do a really powerful open source software that you put on market, and you don't have to, you don't have to be clients' little servant and do everything they ask. You can actually choose the clients you work with. You can really focus on building long-term technology, and you can go to clients and say, oh, actually it's free. What do you mean it's free? Yeah, it's free, just take it and use it. And that's really a whole new concept, because what's the invoice? Well, you don't get an invoice, you're just using it, and here's an SLA, and that's what you get. And I think this is, for me, from a purely technological point of view, the most interesting element in here is that you are changing the way businesses work, and you're changing the way businesses generate revenue. And that's, for me, the most interesting opportunity.
Guys, you're too popular, and you still have more fans that want to ask questions. Can we take a couple more?
What's one? Fun. The fun question, by the way, I think we get paranoid sometimes about all this, but at the end of the day, it's about value creation, right? The trust, representation of trust, and removing the middleman. And there's value then, the pie growing over there. So hopefully the regulators will keep that balance in mind. But my fun question was this, that each of you I want to know from, who do you, obviously in literature we know, we've heard about this person created blockchain and that person created. So each person, I want to know what's your best guess on, it's a crystal ball guess, who created blockchain? Where did it come from? If you don't have an idea, that's a valid answer too, but your guess, that'd be fun.
I hope a woman. A super badass developer.
Is there an answer that you have?
My guess is maybe it's one of the governments, but they don't want to deregulate the whole system. So, but if someone else can give a good answer, that'd be fun.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
So we want to thank our panelists, and now we will have a presentation.